Kilogram. The need for food is growing. With an expected 9 billion people in the world, farmers need to use GMOs to produce the crops more effectively in order to produce more. Imagine a world without food. There's no grocery stores or restaurants. Imagine having to wake up in the morning and scavenge for your own food because you can no longer get it commercially. I bet this is hard for you to imagine, but that is how much agriculture and our farmers effectively eat. If a farmer can no longer produce enough food that the world needs, we will have a major food shortage. Farmers need to produce more with what they have, and genetically modified crops will help them to do that. Today I'll be talking to you about genetically modified crops. I will tell you what they are, the benefits they have, and finally, why we need to use them. A genetically modified crop is a crop that has had its genes artificially inserted into it using biotechnology instead of pollination. Genetically modified crops are made using genetic engineering. There are two methods currently being used, the gene gun and a method that uses bacteria to introduce cells into the DNA of new plants. According to Q&A about genetically modified crops by the International Service for the Acquisition of Agrobiotech Applications, the gene gun works by using the DNA that is coated with tiny particles, then physically shooting those particles onto the plant cells. Some of the DNA comes off and is incorporated into the DNA of the recipient plant. The only difference with genetically modified crops is that the crop is acquiring the gene artificially instead of through pollination. This makes the crop genetically modified. But really, all crops are genetically modified, because plant breeders choose which plants to pollinate with the others. This makes them domestic and out of their wild form. There are different types of genetically modified crops, HT and IR. HT stands for herbicide tolerant, which have traits that helps the plant to tolerate a more effective herbicide, most commonly glyphosate-resistant crops. IR stands for insect-resistant crops. A very common IR crop is corn because there are many difficult insect pests that attack the corn plant. IR is also referred to as BT. There are a large number of BT corn varieties due to the pest the European corn borer. The European corn borer had been a huge problem for farmers because it bores the stalk and kills the plant. When they began making corn varieties with the resistant trait, it completely changed the industry. When the pest begins to chew the plant, it dies, which eliminates the pest and keeps the plant alive and healthy. Glyphosate-resistant crops probably have had the most effect on the farming industry. The plants with a herbicide-tolerant gene do not die when glyphosate is applied to it. Glyphosate is a non-selective plant growth regulator, which means it will kill any plant you apply it to. When the resistant crop, you can apply glyphosate to it, it will kill all the weeds and not harm the crop. It eliminates the need to apply multiple chemicals throughout the growing season, which ends up costing the farmer more. Genetically modified crops have many significant benefits. Not only are developed countries reaping the benefits of genetically modified crops, but a large amount of genetically modified crops are being planted in developing countries as well. 54% of the genetically modified crops are being grown in developing countries like Africa, Asia, and Latin America, which shows that resource-poor farms can also benefit from the technology as stated in Documented Benefits of Genetically Modified Crops by the International Service for the Acquisition of Biotech Applications. The main benefits of genetically modified crops are increased yields, decreased use of pesticide and insecticides, and the ability to produce more with higher net returns. Based on the Agricultural Resource Management Survey, farmers indicate that they adopted genetically modified corn, cotton, and soybeans primarily to increase yield. This was said in Genetically Engineered Crops in the United States, published by the USDA Economic Research Service. The Agricultural Resource Management also conducted another survey asking farmers why they would adopt genetically modified crops. In the case of soybeans, BT and HT corn, BT and HT cotton, the average was around 70% because of increased yield. Not all varieties of genetically modified crops have been proven to have yield increases over the conventional varieties. Although the genetically modified crop has the ability to prevent yield losses to pests, allowing them to reach the full yield potential of the crop, as stated in Genetically Engineered Crops in the United States, published by the USDA Economic Research Service. I previously used the European corn borer as an example of an industry-changing genetically modified trait. Besides reduced costs and better plant life, increased yield has been a large benefit. Adoption of Bt crops have increased yields by alleviating yield loss to pests. Bt crops are particularly effective at easing yield losses. For example, before Bt corn was commercially introduced in 1996, the European corn borer was only partially controlled using chemical insecticides. The chemical was not always profitable, and timely application was difficult. This was stated in Genetically Engineered Crops in the United States, published by the USDA Economic Research Service. Many farmers accepted yield losses of 0.4 to 3.2 bushels from this pest rather than having the expense and uncertainty of chemical control. After the introduction of Bt corn, adopters who had previously controlled the corn borer infestations using insecticides lowered their pesticides costs and increased their yields. Adopters who had not previously treated the European corn borer infestations with insecticides only achieved yield gain. This example shows that yield increase benefits reduced pesticide use and the ability to achieve higher net returns. So 20 years from now, the population will need 55% more food than it can produce now to feed an estimated 9.6 billion people, according to Let's Use Organic and GMOs to Feed the World by Dr. Robert T. Fraley. This has to be done with the same or fewer resources than what we currently have, and as we all know, there's only so much land in the world to use. Genetically modified crops can be a major tool to get this done. GMOs, just one way we help farmers tackle tough challenges. What, How, and Why, published by Monsanto, states corn, soybeans, and cotton make up a majority of the genetically modified crops being planted. Sugar beets, canola, papaya, squash, and alfalfa are also mostly grown as genetically modified crops. About 85% of the corn produced in the U.S. is genetically modified, although soybeans are the most heavily genetically modified. GM crops are cheaper to produce because of reduced pesticide use, which keeps production costs low. This reduces the price of genetically modified crops used for food by as much as 15 to 30%, from keeping food affordable and facts about GMOs. Reducing the use of pesticide and insecticides by using genetically modified crops increases the safety of developing countries who are producing food, which helps them to increase their food production. And as you can see today, I told you about what genetically modified crops are, how they are beneficial, why we need to use them to help feed the world. Imagine if there was a day where you weren't able to produce enough food and the costs were high and you couldn't afford to have good nutritionally based food. By supporting the use of genetically modified foods, you support the ability to feed the world, and we'll only ever have to imagine what would happen if we couldn't. Thank you.